A designer handbag, a spilled drink, one moment of cruelty in a crowded cafe. Margaret thought humiliating a simply dressed woman would be just another boring afternoon's entertainment. She had no idea the quiet woman in plain clothes was married to one of the most powerful men in the country. Some mistakes cost everything. Before we dive into this incredible story of karma and justice, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss these life-changing tales. Trust me, you'll want to see how this unfolds. Now let's begin. It was a typical Thursday afternoon at Riverside Cafe, one of those cozy downtown coffee shops where the smell of fresh espresso mixed with the sound of quiet conversations and the clinking of ceramic cups. Sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden tables. Among the usual crowd of laptop workers and book readers sat Helen Wright, a woman who would become the center of an incident that would change several lives forever. Helen was 32 years old, dressed in simple blue jeans and a soft gray sweater. No jewelry adorned her fingers or neck. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She sat in a corner booth with a paperback novel and a modest cup of black coffee, completely absorbed in her book. To anyone watching, she looked like a regular person enjoying a quiet moment away from the chaos of daily life. And in many ways, that's exactly what she was. What nobody in that cafe knew, however, was that Helen's story was far more complex than her appearance suggested. The peaceful atmosphere shifted when the door swung open and Margaret Huntington entered like a storm dressed in Chanel. At 38, Margaret was the kind of woman who needed everyone to know she had money. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves that had probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Her designer dress hugged her figure, and her handbag, a limited edition piece, dangled from her arm like a trophy. She was followed by two friends, Christine and Beverly, who were cut from the same expensive cloth. The three women swept through the cafe with the kind of confidence that comes from never being told no. They chose a table right next to Helen's quiet corner, their shopping bags from luxury stores crowding the narrow space. Their voices carried across the room as they discussed their morning shopping spree, dropping brand names and price tags like confetti. Margaret ordered an elaborate iced drink, specifying modifications that made the young barista scramble to write everything down. As they waited for their orders, Margaret's sharp eyes landed on Helen. She noticed the simple clothes, the worn paperback book, the plain coffee cup. A smirk played across her perfectly painted lips. She leaned toward Christine and Beverly, her voice deliberately loud enough to carry. "Look at some people who come to places like this," she said with a laugh. "Probably spent their whole week's budget on that coffee." Her friends giggled, glancing over at Helen with poorly concealed amusement. Helen heard every word. She'd heard comments like this before in her life, long before her circumstances changed. She simply turned a page in her book, choosing not to engage. Her silence, her refusal to react, only seemed to irritate Margaret further. There's a certain type of person who can't stand being ignored, especially when they're trying to establish dominance. Margaret was exactly that type of person. "I mean, really," Margaret continued, her voice growing louder, "if you can't afford to dress properly, maybe stay home. This is a nice establishment." She glanced at Helen, waiting for a reaction, for embarrassment, for something. But Helen remained calm, her eyes moving across the words on the page, though by now she wasn't really reading anymore. She was simply maintaining her composure, refusing to give this woman the satisfaction of a response. That's when Margaret decided to escalate. She picked up her freshly delivered iced Coca-Cola, condensation dripping down the plastic cup. She stood up, pretending to reach for something in her shopping bag, and in one deliberate motion, accidentally knocked the entire drink directly onto Helen. The cold liquid splashed across Helen's sweater, her jeans, her book, pooling on the table and dripping onto the floor. The cafe went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every head turned. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth in mock surprise, but her eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Oh my goodness," she said, her tone dripping with false concern. "I'm so clumsy. But honestly, maybe this will improve your wardrobe situation." Her friends burst into laughter. Margaret pulled out her phone and snapped photos of Helen sitting there, soaked and shocked, sticky brown liquid staining her clothes. "This is going on my social media," Margaret announced. "My followers will love this." The cafe staff rushed over with towels, but they were young, intimidated, and clearly afraid to confront someone like Margaret who wore wealth like armor. Helen sat very still for a moment, processing what had just happened. Then, with quiet dignity, she took the towels and began cleaning herself. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained composed. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She simply gathered her ruined book, her bag, and stood up. Margaret, feeling victorious, delivered her final blow. "You should apologize for being in the way." Helen looked at her for the first time, really looked at her, and something in her calm gaze made Margaret shift uncomfortably. But Helen said nothing. She walked toward the door with her head high, leaving a trail of Coca-Cola drops behind her. "That's right, run away," Margaret called after her, laughing with her friends, already typing the caption for her social media post. Outside the cafe, Helen stood on the sidewalk, the autumn breeze cool against her wet clothes. Her hands were shaking now, not from fear, but from the effort of holding back her emotions. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. It rang twice before a man's voice answered, warm and concerned. "Helen? You don't usually call during the day. Everything okay?" "Thomas," she said, and her voice finally cracked. "Something happened. I'm okay, but I need you to know something happened." Thomas Wright was sitting in his corner office on the 20th floor of Wright Tower, a building he owned in the financial district. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the entire city. He was in the middle of reviewing contracts with his assistant, Garrett, but the moment he heard the tremor in his wife's voice, nothing else mattered. "Tell me what happened," he said, his tone shifting from warm to protective. Helen took a breath and explained. She downplayed it, as she often did, not wanting to worry him. But Thomas knew his wife. He could hear what she wasn't saying in the pauses between her words. When she finished, there was a moment of silence on the line. Garrett, who had been organizing papers, looked up and saw his boss's expression change. Thomas Wright was known in business circles as a man who was fair but formidable. Right now, his face showed the latter. "Which cafe?" Thomas asked quietly. "Thomas, please don't make a scene. It's really not worth it." "You're worth everything," he replied simply. "Which cafe, Helen?" She told him. He was already standing, buttoning his suit jacket. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Go home, change, and meet me there if you want. Or don't. But I'm going." To understand what happened next, you need to understand who Helen and Thomas really were. 3 years earlier, Helen had been volunteering at a community shelter, serving meals to people who'd fallen on hard times. She did it twice a week, not for recognition or social media posts, but because she genuinely cared. One evening, a man in simple clothes came through the line. He didn't look homeless, but he didn't look wealthy either. He thanked her for the meal and asked about the shelter's needs. That man was Thomas Wright. He'd come there anonymously because he donated to dozens of charities and wanted to see where his money actually went. But what captured his attention wasn't the facility or the programs. It was Helen. The way she spoke to everyone with the same respect, whether they were wearing rags or regular clothes. The way she remembered names and asked about people's lives. Her kindness wasn't performed. It was genuine. They started talking. He came back the next week and the next. She had no idea he was wealthy. He didn't tell her about the companies, the real estate empire, the billions. When he finally asked her to dinner, she said yes because she liked him, not because of anything he could give her. Their relationship grew naturally, built on genuine connection rather than circumstance. When Thomas finally revealed his wealth, Helen was shocked. But what surprised Thomas even more was her reaction. She didn't get excited about the money. She got worried about what it might change. "I don't want to become someone different," she told him. "I like my life. I like who I am." That's when Thomas knew he'd found something rare. Someone who loved him for who he was, not what he had. They married quietly, just close friends and family. Helen insisted on keeping her normal life. She didn't want bodyguards or drivers following her around. She wanted to walk through the city, grab coffee, visit bookstores, volunteer at the shelter. Thomas respected that, though it sometimes worried him. They compromised. She could live simply, but she had to let him take care of certain things behind the scenes. She agreed, as long as it didn't change how she moved through the world. So Helen continued wearing simple clothes, shopping at regular stores, living in a way that felt authentic to her. Most people had no idea she was married to one of the richest men in America. And that's exactly how she wanted it. Until today, when that choice had made her a target. Back at Riverside Cafe, Margaret was riding high on her cruel victory. She'd already posted 3 photos online with captions mocking the poor woman she'd encountered. Her wealthy friends were liking and commenting, laughing at her wit. Christine and Beverly were encouraging her, adding their own commentary about people who didn't belong in decent establishments. Margaret felt clever, powerful, entertained. That's when the Rolls-Royce arrived. The sleek black Phantom pulled up to the curb outside the cafe like a panther stalking prey. Its presence was impossible to ignore. The custom vehicle probably cost more than the cafe's annual revenue. Conversations inside stopped as people pressed against the windows to look. A uniformed chauffeur stepped out and opened the rear door with practiced precision. Thomas Wright emerged in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his presence commanding without effort. He was tall, composed, and moved with the confidence of someone who'd built an empire from nothing. Garrett followed, tablet in hand, phone already pressed to his ear. They walked toward the cafe entrance, and something about Thomas's expression made people instinctively move out of his way. Inside, Margaret was oblivious, still scrolling through the comments on her post, reading them aloud to her friends. Listen to this one. You're so brave for calling out these people. Brave! I love it! She was mid-laugh when Thomas walked through the door. The cafe went silent again, but this time the energy was different. Thomas scanned the room, his eyes landing on the table where the incident had occurred. The Coca-Cola stain was still visible on the floor. His jaw tightened. Then he looked at Margaret's table, at the shopping bags, at the 3 women still giggling over a phone screen. He walked directly to their table. I believe you posted something on social media just now, he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made Margaret look up. She was annoyed by the interruption, barely glancing at him. Do I know you? I'm busy. You threw a drink on someone, Thomas continued. My wife. Margaret's eyes widened slightly, then she laughed, a nervous sound trying to mask itself as confidence. That woman in the cheap clothes? That's your wife? She looked at Christine and Beverly, expecting them to share her amusement. Sure she is. Nice try. Thomas pulled out his phone with deliberate slowness. He turned the screen toward Margaret. On it was his verified social media profile. Thomas Wright, CEO of Wright Industries. Net worth listed at $8.7 billion, 500 million followers. And there, among his few personal posts, was a recent photo from a charity gala. Thomas in a tuxedo, standing beside Helen in an elegant dress, both smiling at the camera. The caption read, "With my amazing wife, the most genuine person I know." The color drained from Margaret's face. Her eyes darted from the phone to Thomas's face and back again. Her hand holding her own phone began to tremble. I didn't, she stammered. You didn't know she mattered, Thomas said quietly. That's the problem, isn't it? You thought because she dressed simply, she was beneath you, worth humiliating for your entertainment. Margaret scrambled for her phone, fingers frantically trying to delete her posts, but Garrett was already stepping forward. I have screenshots, he said, showing his tablet. Everything you posted, every comment, all time-stamped. Christine and Beverly were slowly backing away from the table, distancing themselves, pretending they'd never really been friends with Margaret at all. Other cafe patrons were now recording the scene on their phones. Margaret could feel her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Thomas made a call right there, putting his phone on speaker. It rang 3 times before a man answered. Thomas? This is unexpected. To what do I owe? Philip, Thomas interrupted. We need to talk about your wife. There was a pause. My wife? What about Margaret? She just assaulted mine, in public, and posted about it online, mocking her. The man on the other end, Philip Huntington, went silent. Garrett pulled up information on his tablet and showed it to Thomas, who nodded. Philip, I'm looking at our contracts right now. Your commercial real estate firm has 3 major deals with my corporation, worth about 50 million annually to your business, if I'm calculating correctly. Thomas, please let me. I'll send you the footage and screenshots. You have 24 hours to decide how your company responds to this. If your wife's behavior reflects your company's values, we'll need to reconsider our partnership. Thomas ended the call. Margaret was pale, shaking. Please, she whispered. I didn't know. I didn't know who she was. Thomas looked at her with something close to pity. That's exactly the point. You didn't know, so you thought it didn't matter. You thought someone dressed simply was fair game for cruelty. My wife chose to live modestly because she values character over appearance. She volunteers at homeless shelters. She donates most of her money to people in need. She treats everyone, regardless of how they look or what they have, with respect. He paused. You chose to humiliate her for entertainment. Margaret started crying, mascara running down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of panic, of social destruction, of consequences finally arriving. Her phone was buzzing constantly now. Philip calling, friends texting, her carefully curated life unraveling in real time. Thomas didn't sue. He didn't need to. Within hours, Garrett had sent the security footage to select media outlets. The story went viral. Not Margaret's original post mocking Helen, but the truth, the full context. A billionaire's wife choosing to live humbly, humiliated by a woman who judged her by her clothes. And then the reveal, the confrontation, the karma. Margaret's social media exploded, but not the way she'd wanted. Thousands of comments poured in, not praising her wit, but condemning her cruelty. Her wealthy friends abandoned her, embarrassed to be associated with someone who'd caused such a spectacle. Philip lost the contracts with Wright Industries, and 3 other companies followed suit, not wanting to be connected to the scandal. Within a week, Philip filed for separation, unable to forgive Margaret for destroying his business relationships. Margaret, who'd never worked a real job in her life, suddenly found herself alone, her marriage dissolving, her friends gone, her reputation destroyed. She was forced to take a position at a retail store, experiencing for the first time what it was like to be treated as lesser than by people who judged her by her circumstances. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching her story unfold. Meanwhile, Helen continued her life much as before. She still wore simple clothes. She still volunteered. She still grabbed coffee at regular cafes, though she avoided Riverside for a while. But she did make one change. She started a foundation, funded by Thomas but run by her, dedicated to supporting people who'd experienced public humiliation and bullying. She wanted something positive to come from that awful day. 6 months later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, Helen returned to Riverside Cafe. She wore jeans and a sweater, carried a paperback book, and ordered a simple black coffee. When she sat down at the same corner table, the staff recognized her. But instead of treating her differently because they now knew who she was, they treated her with the same kindness they should have shown everyone all along. And that, Helen thought, settling into her seat and opening her book, was exactly the point. And that's how one moment of cruelty changed everything. Helen didn't need designer clothes to have worth. She had something far more valuable: character, and a husband who loved her for exactly who she was. Margaret learned the hardest lesson of her life, that how you treat people when you think they don't matter reveals everything about who you really are. If this story touched you, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs this reminder. Comment below, would you choose a simple life even if you had billions? Subscribe for more incredible stories of justice and redemption. Remember, never judge someone by their appearance. You never know their story. Treat everyone with respect, not because of what they might have, but because it's the right thing to do. See you in the next one.